if you get directors together for more than a few minutes, they start talking about their nightmare scenarios. And the nightmare scenario is just being irrelevant.
In this first season of Talking Pictures, you'll hear me talk to a lot of directors, but none of them will have made as many movies as Steven Soderbergh. He has directed 35 films since his debut feature, Sex, Lives, and Videotape, in 1989. That film won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. Soderbergh was only 26 at the time. He is still the youngest director to win that award. Just this month, Soderbergh has a new film premiering at Sundance. It's a psychological thriller called Presence. It was announced in December, shortly after we talked. I can't wait to see it, largely because it's a Steven Soderbergh movie. As you'll hear in our conversation, many of his films are among my favorites. I'm hardly alone. Soderbergh has directed blockbuster franchises like the Ocean's films with George Clooney, as well as the Magic Mike series that stars Channing Tatum. He's worked with the biggest names in Hollywood: Meryl Streep, Julia Roberts, Brad Pitt, Matt Damon. Back in 2000, he was nominated for a Best Director Oscar twice in the same year, so he was competing against himself for Traffic and Erin Brockovich. All of this is to say he manages to be both prolific and artistic. When he's not making movies, he's watching them. So he's the perfect guy to talk pictures with. Stick around for Steven Soderbergh. I'm your host, Ben Mankiewicz, and this is Talking Pictures, a podcast about movies, about memories, and all the stuff that happens in between. Turner Classic Movies makes this podcast with the streaming service Max, where you can see some of the movies mentioned in this episode. I'm not going to shy away from this. Steven Soderbergh is one of my favorite filmmakers, and of the dozens of movies he's made, nothing tops Out of Sight. I watch it every year. It came out in 1998 and stars George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez, backed by this cast of supporting actors who you badly want to be friends with. Ving Rhames, Steve Zahn, Catherine Keener, Dennis Farina. I even want to be pals with the bad guys, and they're violent bad guys, played by Don Cheadle and Luis Guzman. Anyway, Clooney is Jack Foley, a bank robber who breaks out of prison, only to come face-to-face with a federal agent, played by Jennifer Lopez. But instead of a game of cat and mouse, the two are almost immediately drawn to each other.
You have my wallet.
And your gun.
Think I can have him back?
How do we do that?
Let's see. You can come on by my dad's place to drop him off.
Yeah, I could leave it with the SWAT guy that answers the door.
You know, there's a guy here on the task force right now. Maybe I should put him on the phone and let the two of you work it out.
You wouldn't do that.
Oh, why not?
Because you're having too much fun.
You know, I have this intense now 25-year love affair with 26 years by the time people hear this, with Out of Sight. I mean, it was just this, you know, I know that it changed your life and it changed George Clooney's life. It also changed mine. And, you know, I don't know that I'd have this job. I don't know if any of those things would have happened if I hadn't had the experience of seeing Out of Sight, which is my seminal theater experience of just coming out of that.
What was activated?
So I thought many times, like, what is it? And I think it is all these guys doing solids for each other, like all these sort of unspoken things. And it's not just the guys. I would include Jennifer Lopez in there and Catherine Keener, right? Who do these people who stand by their friends, even when their friends are behaving like bozos.
Right.
You know, and I laughed a lot. And I wanted to be in a group where Ving Rhames was my best friend. Right. You know, and where I was George Clooney. You know.
Well, when I think of it now, I think of it mostly in the context of what a clear illustration it is of what a director does in this context. In the space of a few years, You have Get Shorty, Jackie Brown, and Out of Sight. These are all based on Elmore Leonard books. Very, very different films. All of them, I would argue, work in the basic sense, but that's what directors do, is they have a specific take. And so when I think of it, I sort of group it in with those other films. And it was a watershed project. I was someone, I think, who was viewed as not having fulfilled whatever potential people thought I had based on the first film. And people were waiting to see George be the movie star that I certainly felt he was. And so talk about luck, us connecting at that moment on that film. That's everything changed after.
This quote's probably a quarter century old, but it's from Clooney. I think Steven is reluctant to be a successful director. That's why he stayed independent for so long. There's a part of him that still wants to be Steven Soderbergh from Baton Rouge and doesn't want to have to answer to anybody.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. George might be the most quotable person on the planet, and a real friend in the sense of, and people who are his friends know this, like this is the person you want in your corner, and that quality that he brings to something like the Ocean's films is of leadership and as you were saying, a sort of integrity and an ethos about how you do things. That is him. Like, this is the person you want next to you when you go into battle. And unlike a lot of people, he punches up. Like when he attacks, he goes up. He doesn't punch down, and that's rare.
And that's why, and I guess and that's the feeling that I got in Out of Sight, right? That this is the guy you want in your corner. That's why I want to be friends with Jack Foley. I want to be friends with George Clooney, right?
Well, I mean, there was no, to me, having sensed George from what I saw, and then having met him in the first meeting where I'm trying to get this job. I am desperately trying to get this job. I literally have to wait for most of the town to pass. People are just passing. I don't know why, but they are. And so I finally get this meeting, and I met George, and all of those qualities that we take for granted now were there. And I thought, oh, this is all I have to do is make sure the camera is in the right place to capture what is there. Like, I don't have to manufacture it. It's just there. And so, great script. Like I said, my job is make sure people see what I'm seeing.
You said I think I'm quoting this correctly, that without Schizopolis and Grey's Anatomy, which were films, I guess 5 and 6, that you wouldn't have made Out of Sight.
I wouldn't have known how. I wouldn't have known stylistically what it needed, I think, and I wouldn't have been as free. Like, I felt free when I was making it. There was a lot of self-imposed pressure. I knew that if I screwed it up, I was in real trouble. I'm going to be in movie jail for a while. But I was surrounded by really talented people. It was mine to lose. And I knew that in order not to lose it, I needed to be relaxed and just pretend it's 1973.
Right. Why you bring up 1973? I think that's the last detail. Is that
Yeah, that was my pitch um, to Jersey Films and to George, that the balance of character, humor, and drama to me conjured Hal Ashby. So that's what I went in with. I mean, we're all standing on somebody's shoulders. I think the key is whose shoulders are those? I mean, that really defines you as a filmmaker. Is what did you watch that you thought was great? And the tricky part is sometimes these influences aren't things you should say out loud when you're trying to get somebody to give you some money. There's some very influential films like Seconds, the John Frankenheimer film, is, I think, a really influential film for filmmakers of my generation. Not a success, not a critical success, not a commercial success. And the same would go for something like The Parallax View. And then you have a film like Wanda, you know, that is, if you brought that up in a meeting and said, I want it to be like Wanda, the Barbara Loden film, those are hugely influential films that don't translate into anything other than an aesthetic. Like you can't use them as an indicator of commercial success. So you got to be careful. You don't want to say Schizopolis in a meeting. I can tell you that.
No, right. That's right. Nobody now. Now there are other Steven Soderbergh films to pick from. Every film that you mentioned there, Seconds, Wanda, Carnal Knowledge, The Last Detail. I'm like, oh, I love that. I love that movie.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But I get even with Last Detail, like Hal Ashby had this unbelievable 7-movie 9-year run between 70 and 79, like that starts with The Landlord and ends with Being There, and includes The Last Detail, and but he partly, and I don't know the full Hal Ashby story, but he couldn't bear the suits, right? I mean, he was so independent. Whereas I think that there are guys like you are independent and fiercely protective over your artistic choices, but you and Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg, you guys have figured out how to also play along. Norman Jewison, who obviously worked with Hal Ashby for so long, Norman figured it out.
Yep.
While still retaining the soul of an artist, but Hal didn't seem like he could, or he didn't want to.
Well, look, different time. He came up through a different pathway. As we were just discussing, I had examples to look at of how I wanted to try, if I got the opportunity, to navigate the system, the economic system of the movie business. And I decided that, engagement and transparency were the best moves. First of all, they're really efficient. And, engagement means direct, clear communication. And transparency obviously means transparency. So I'm not interested in anything being a mystery or cultivating a personality that is viewed as mysterious, or that I say one thing to one person and another thing to another person. These are all choices, that you can make. And, I remember reading an interview with George Miller of Mad Max fame. And this is in the 80s, after he'd made Witches of Eastwick and the Twilight Zone episode. And somebody said, so what's it like working in Hollywood? And he said, look, I think there's several different kinds of Hollywood. And at a certain point, you really need to decide which version of it you want to participate in. And I read that in 1986 and thought, okay, well, I know what version of that I want to operate in. And so I gravitate toward people that I feel share my ethos about both the quality of a product or a movie and how you treat people.
Out of Sight was a success for everyone involved. The production company behind it was happy. That's Jersey Films, co-founded by Danny DeVito. It launched George Clooney into the rarefied air of an A-list actor. It also relaunched the career of Steven Soderbergh. Because after Sex, Lives, and Videotape, Soderbergh had a string of commercial flops, 5 movies in all: Kafka, King of the Hill, The Underneath, Schizopolis, and Grey's Anatomy. I was eager to understand what that time was like for him. So, Sex, Lives, and Videotape wins the Palme d'Or. You have that great quote, I think it's from Cannes, right? Where you say, like, it's all downhill from here, right? Which was weirdly prescient, even though it's unfair to call what the next 5 films are failures, because I think you really like 4 of them. And like, I saw Kafka last night. I loved it, right? I mean, I just loved it. I just thought it was wonderful, right? And so, like, you're
the second person in my life that's ever said that.
The Kafka, King of the Hill, The Underneath, Schizopolis, and Grey's Anatomy. So I know you're a Dateline fan.
Yes.
And I know when we met at the film festival, you said, it's nice to see you, but I'm only doing this to get to your brother.
I know. You look so wounded.
No, my brother.
Is it because everybody says that, or because you thought I was not kidding?
We both, no, I don't think you were kidding. And now that I've seen your lists, I know that you do watch a tremendous amount of Dateline.
I do.
No, my brother is the greatest Big Brother in the world. And so, I love his success. He's a huge champion.
He's very good. He's very good.
So I want to ask this next question in the voice of my brother, since you love Dateline so much. And it's really the voice of Bill Hader imitating my brother. But it's, Steven, after Sex, Lives, and Videotape, the kind of success you had there, most people would have gone on to make big studio films with big stars, but you didn't do that, did you?
Exactly. That's good. Yeah. And I'm sweating just at the question. Well, the fact of the matter is, one of the projects I set up with Sidney Pollack as producer was based on a novel by William Brinkley called The Last Ship. And I was did adapt it, and wanted to go to Harrison Ford to play the lead. And the Berlin Wall fell and all that stuff happened. And it became clear, like, the subject matter as portrayed in the book suddenly, thankfully, became kind of irrelevant. And so the project went away and was later resuscitated as a TV series. But that was, again, when you talk about wanting to send a message after Sex, Lies to people, I am not going to just make that movie over and over again. The 3 things that I put into development were The Last Ship, Kafka, and King of the Hill. And so The Last Ship, I have a script. Like, we were ready. Sidney obviously had a relationship with Harrison. We were ready to, like, start making that happen, and the world changed and it went away. So I was, I was moving in a couple different directions. I felt protected by Sidney. You know what I mean? Like, if I'm going to now step into this pond of making a studio movie with a movie star, I really want Sidney in the same way that I really wanted and needed somebody like Jersey Films on Out of Sight and Erin Brockovich. So I try to tell young filmmakers how important it is to have really, really good producers. Like, it's so, like, don't fall into this trap of, I can do everything myself. And, like, you need really good producers. You really do.
You've mentioned it in other interviews, and you did hear about the sort of the most difficult time there was The Underneath, where you felt unmoored, like something was not right, and you wanted to learn what kind of filmmaker you were or focus on that. But I couldn't, I didn't see it, and I wanted to see it in preparation for this, but you can't see it. And some people really
It's
liked it,
hard to
and
see. It's hard to see. You've
it's
really got to know people.
yeah. Is that how you want it? That it's hard to see?
No, look, it's actually it's the quickest route is probably through the Criterion version of King of the Hill, where it appears as the world's longest and most expensive supplementary material. It is there.
The whole movie
The whole movie is there.
is a supplement to the criteria.
Yes,
All right, good to know.
yes.
All right.
And I'm always very anxious not to make anybody involved in that film feel bad. If I say I can't defend it, like because I was in a weird headspace where I was kind of unmoored and not sure what I should be doing. Should I be making? Should I be sort of? I guess at that point, before going and having this psychotic break and making Schizopolis and Grey's Anatomy, I felt there was no way to reconcile these two impulses that I have inside of me. One is I want to make things that can be shown in 3,000 theaters, but I also want to make things that are, bespoke and hopefully, not like other things. And there's a line where if you go too far, most people kind of tap out. To sit on a film set, the place that I'd fantasized about being since I was 12, and be unhappy was the thing that shocked me into, well, dude, you gotta do a tear down and a rebuild, because how is that possible? How could you sit on a film set and not be happy? And that's, I went back to Baton Rouge, where I started making films with the people that I started making films with, and made Schizopolis and Grey's Anatomy with those people, and did the book with Richard Lester, and kind of it's what Keith Richards does with his blood every year. So, it had to happen. Like, it had to happen.
We're going to take a quick break. Coming up, Steven Soderbergh gives us his mantra for directing a movie.
My mental space on set is, don't flip out, dude.
Welcome back. I'm talking to Steven Soderbergh, who has worked with nearly every A-lister in Hollywood. So we start with, as your first film, with Sex, Lies, and Videotape. And you got James Spader and Andie MacDowell, and Peter Gallagher, and Laura San Giacomo. And then, your most recent at this point, you got Channing Tatum and Salma Hayek in the third Magic Mike movie, right? So, and in between, I'll leave some people out, but obviously we talked about Clooney and J-Lo and then Don Cheadle and Brad Pitt and Matt Damon, Gwyneth Paltrow. We talked Julia Roberts. I should probably bring her up.
Yeah.
Meryl Streep.
Yeah.
Benicio del
I've heard
Toro.
of her. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. People like her.
So do people, you, to be a good director, and you obviously like directing, you love doing it, you must love actors. I love actors. They're so good at this thing. They all get treated differently, right? The notion that you treat them all the same is ridiculous. You have to direct people differently based on who they are. Yeah?
Yes. Without seeming like a phony or a sort of shapeshifter. But I think it's more, I don't change my affect. I am who I am. What I'm trying to determine is what kind of engagement works for them. Do they like to talk a lot? Do they like to talk a lot but not about the thing that you're doing? Do they not like to talk? Well, I'm just trying to I'm just trying to gauge what I don't want them thinking about their relationship with me. I want them thinking about the thing that we're doing. And so my mental space on set is that there is no other shot. This is the shot. And at the same time, in a year, this will all be over. Meaning, don't flip out, dude. Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like, stay focused, get this shot, just get this shot, and then we'll worry about the next shot then. But, and then a year from now,
Right.
it'll be done. So like, keep everything calm.
There's two George Clooney movies that I watch probably twice a year. One of them we've been talking about, Out of Sight. And the other one you must love because it has Sidney Pollack and George in it. And, you know, it's Tony Gilroy's film, Michael Clayton.
I think it's a perfect movie. Like,
It's a perfect movie, yeah.
those are rare. If it's not my favorite George performance, it's tied for first. My sole creative contribution was to try and get Tony and George in a room.
And it worked.
Yeah.
What's the name of the actress who then you put in Contagion, who you saw, who was cut out of Michael Clayton?
Oh, Jennifer Ely. God,
Jennifer Ely,
a publicly known story.
I mean, it's publicly known that I read it somewhere, but I read it in regards to
no.
because she was so good.
I never told her that. Like, that would be, I think, not a socially adept thing to tell her. You know, I was somebody who said, you know, he shouldn't have anybody to talk to. He should be alone. You should just cut all those scenes. I feel like that's not a way to get somebody to want to be in your movie or to want to look you in the eye. But obviously, I adore Jennifer Ely, and the fact that when everything comes together, it's just you should just be happy instead of trying to break down, you know, like why it all came together. Just be happy. Like, that was just a blessed project.
Yeah, and obviously you'd seen her performance in it, and she was very good. I mean, that to me is a little less. It's a lesson in filmmaking. I mean, obviously you liked her performance. You gave her a significant part, an important part in Contagion.
Contagion went through a very dramatic post-production process in which 45 minutes of edited material got thrown out and involved me having to write letters to people saying, this whole storyline is gone. I'm so sorry. This is all on me. This is my fault. The thing was not, you know, achieving itness. And I had to make some very bold moves. And that is part of the process. Like, and that decision in the case of Contagion had nothing to do with the quality of the material. It had to do with the fact that as a total thing, it wasn't coming together, like it wasn't coalescing. And we sort of did some radical things in the editing room, did a week of reshoots, and, you know, we're able to get it where we got it. But I view it as a very natural thing. But it's really terrible, you know, to be on the other end of a decision like that. You've gotten to the hardest of the hardest part of the job, which is those kinds of decisions. And the only rule is you have to do them personally.
Right. I loved Contagion for a lot of one. I saw it again, as many people did post COVID. It takes on this whole new sort of interesting prescient nature that it didn't have when it came out, although I liked it then too. I like any movie, and I don't mean this personally, just because she's a big star, where you're like, hey, look, it's Gwyneth Paltrow. And then like 4 minutes later, she's vomiting and dead. Like that is a bold thing to do with a big star.
She was so game and a director's dream on set. I mean, you know, all you have to do is ask. All you have to do is ask for what you want, and she can do it. And those couple of moments are, a perfect opportunity for somebody of a certain mindset to be concerned how they will look. And she didn't give a shit. She was just, okay, I'm going to fall on the floor. Like, how, we talked about the rhythm of it, the rhythm of the seizure and how much foam and all that. And she's on the floor and she's going like this.
Hey, honey? Oh, Beth. Hey, honey. Hey, Beth, Jesus. Sweetheart.
That's when I say that's a director's dream, it makes it sound like, oh, I want people that are just so compliant that, and it's not that. It's really, you want someone who's equally invested in just figuring out what the thing wants to be. And you show up every day with an idea of that. Things change. You start rehearsing. We have other people. Now it's live. Now you're here. They're in their costumes. They're wired. We're as soon as we block this and rehearse it, we're shooting. In that situation, I'm not looking for total compliance. I'm still looking for something that I think is going to be interesting to look at, and then figuring out how to shoot it. Again, so it's a conversation with Gwyneth. How does she reach for the cup that she knocks on the floor? What can she see? She feels like she's going to faint. Just I love that stuff. And so just dealing with somebody who's not coming from a both feet in place, as opposed to a defensive, I'm protecting something space, is what I'm looking for. Because I'm not protecting anything when I'm on set. Like I said, I'm not putting out vibes that are like, man, don't say anything to that guy. Like, don't pitch anything to him. I'm hoping it feels like we're moving in a direction, but boy, do I like a sentence that starts with "what if."
So I read, and I don't have any context for it. This was just in a note given to me that sort of one of the directors who of the TCM era that you admire enormously, maybe the one you admire more, is Howard Hawks. Is that correct? Is that a?
Yeah, that's fair.
So Hawks is the inspiration for the title of the wonderful Peter Bogdanovich book. And the title is Who the Devil Made It. It was his interviews with directors. But the Hawks quote is that when you watch a film, you ought to know who the devil made it. And that's a great line. I love it. Do you feel that way, that you ought to be able to identify the director from the picture? And the second part, as you answer, would be, is there a, do you think people see it and go, oh, that's a Steven Soderbergh picture?
I'm certainly looking for a signature. I want to come away feeling only that filmmaker making that thing would do that. Like I want all-encompassing specificity and clarity of intention. That's what I hope for. It's hard, as Orson Welles said to, I think, a journalist, and with Orson, who knows if these stories are true or not, but they're always good. I'm the bird, you're the ornithologist. Like it's a weird, inverted process to consider how other people consider you. And it's not something that I think anybody should spend a lot of time on. So I came to believe that it was better if I was not a brand. But as we were saying before, I think somebody going into a room to sell something would pick a title of a film that I've made, as opposed to saying it'll be like a film he would make. Because if you say that, it could mean anything. But if you say Ocean's 11, okay, that makes me feel happy.
I'm super interested in Michael Curtiz, and in part because he's seen as a director who didn't have a, you don't know who the devil made it, but you do know that it was good,
Yeah.
right? And so many different types of movies, right? I mean, from Yankee Doodle Dandy to Casablanca to Mildred Pierce, and Four Daughters and Angels Have Dirty Faces. Like, the guy could do almost anything, it seems, and it was excellent. But he somehow doesn't get mentioned among the great directors, in part because I think there wasn't a signature style.
No, his style was that he was a very, very good filmmaker. And
is that enough?
Yeah, well, I think it's enough. That's all I care about. That's all I would want anybody to say about me. And he did not have, I think, or didn't seem to cultivate a persona or conversations that exalted him beyond just being a very good director. I think that's plenty, and he just liked to work. And like you said, he made all kinds of films, as did Hawks, and those were the kinds of careers that I wanted. I mean, from the get-go. Look, we're talking. It'll be this January. It'll be 35 years since Sex Lies premiered at Sundance. So the fact I'm still working 35 years later, if you told me in 1989, 35 years from now, you will still be working, that would have made me really happy. That's, a lot of filmmakers that I respect didn't get that much time. If you get directors together for more than a few minutes, they start talking about their nightmare scenarios. And the nightmare scenario is feeling, out of sync, completely out of sync with the culture generally. And the worst, the seventh circle of that is just being irrelevant. I mean, that's every director's worst nightmare, is just, it's not even people are angry at what you're doing. They just don't care.
Right. They don't notice.
Yeah. Like that's so again, lucky.
Has that influenced your occasional dabbling with retirement? Like, I don't want to get there. I'll leave when I'm still relevant.
That was driven by a frustration at the trajectory of the movie business at that point in time, and not any dissatisfaction with the job itself, which is what I realized when I came out of retirement after 3 months, to make The Knick, and got on the set of The Knick and realized, oh, I love this job. They're just aspects of the business that I conflated with the job. So that was, I learned something. And the real thing I learned is next time I have plans to step away, I'm either not going to say it, or I'll do something or say something so inexcusably horrible that I can never be employed again.
You'll cancel
yourself.
There's
a long list.
I wasn't going to ask you about retiring. But your what you described made me think of it, and I wondered whether that was.
Well, look, I don't think it's the cinematic equivalent of the last big score.
Right.
If you're a director, you're like, I just want to make one last thing that like everybody sees and everybody like it is that kind of tractor beam, and I really want to be. I can't make that go away. I think everybody has that. I just want to acknowledge it and own it. and really analyze whether it's influencing decisions.
We're taking another quick break. When we return, Steven Soderbergh gives us his Super 8 and throws in some relationship advice. And we're back. This is the part of the conversation where we ask our guests a series of set questions about movies they've watched, movies they've loved, and movies they'll never forget. We call it the Super 8. All right, Steven Soderbergh, Super 8.
Super 8, here we go.
Movie you loved in high school.
Well, okay. High school is where my nascent movie-going bug implanted in me by my father began to really blossom. So I saw conservatively over the 4 years of high school, somewhere between 800 and 850 new distinct movies. Now, the movie that I saw the most...
800 and 850 in high school?
On average, 4 a week.
Okay.
Because I was going to high school on the LSU campus, which had a very well curated and active film program. And there was also a repertory house with 2 screens on the southern gates of the campus, the Varsity Theater. So I was seeing a lot of movies. Now, that being said, by the time I graduated high school, the movie I'd seen the most was Jaws. I'd seen Jaws 28 times by the time I graduated high school, which kind of segues into one of the other Super 8 questions, which is your most memorable movie-going experience.
That was actually question 1, but I didn't write it. I indented too much for number 1, so I missed it, even though I've done 10 of these. So yes, most memorable movie watching experience.
So these two things are connected. Now, the first movie I ever saw was Planet of the Apes at a drive-in in Pittsburgh in 1968. So I was 5 years old. I remember my dad covering my face with his hands with what I later, before I saw what I later understood to be the scene early on in the movie where one of the, pods was cracked and the person within it aged, 200 years and turned into a skeleton.
You all right? Stuart? Stuart?
Now, how he knew this was coming, I don't know. Maybe the music by Jerry Goldsmith tipped him off. But I remember my dad putting his hand over my face so I couldn't see this and the other people in the car reacting. June 1975, when Jaws was released, I was living in Charlottesville. I was a movie bug because of my father. So I saw a lot of movies. I'd seen a lot of movies.
Tell me your dad's name, what he did?
Peter A. Soderbergh, who was Dr. Peter A. Soderbergh, who during this period was the dean of education at LSU. Anyway, I got the movie bug from my dad. Summer of 75, I'm shipped to Florida, to St. Petersburg, alone to see my grandparents. And I want to see this movie, Jaws, which is, everywhere. And I go alone. And when I get out of it, I have 2 questions. What does directed by mean? And who is Steven Spielberg? Another thing that's ubiquitous everywhere you go is the Jaws log by Carl Gottlieb, which was published right around the time the film came out. This was a really good sort of introduction to what it meant to have a job in which you made that a movie. Like it hadn't, until I saw that film, it didn't occur to me this was something you could do. So I walked in a fan and I walked out an aspiring filmmaker in 2 hours and 4 minutes.
At age 12.
Yeah.
And then in high school, you were making short films, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you go through a process. You start with imitating everything that you've seen that you like as best you can. And then you move into phase 2, which is very autobiographical, and everything that happens to you is interesting and worth memorializing. And then hopefully you move into phase 3, where the things that you've learned from those first 2 phases are applied to ideas and experiences that are not yours, that are you've left the house and you're out in the world. So yeah, I mean, by the time my senior year of high school, I made a 20-minute short film about my experience in my senior year of high school that I think is still one of the best things that I've done. It's totally impressionistic. There's no plot. It's a series of sequences. And it's all there. I mean, you can watch it now and you go, it's all there. The music choices, the shots, the cutting patterns, it's all there.
Movie you'd show a date?
Well, it's interesting that as opposed to answering that specifically, I want to talk about how important it is for all of us, if we're in a relationship, to have some amount of synchronicity about what we watch and what we like, because this is a large part of your relationship. I mean, I hope, which is you have enough time occasionally to sit down and say, what are we going to watch? And if there's no Venn diagram that connects the two of you, this is a problem. Like, this is a real problem. And so I will say, and I wonder if most people feel this way, that there are certain movies, let's just stick with movies, that if you were to suggest, or if you said, have you seen X? And the person that you're dating said, yes, I hate it, and it's something you love, that now goes into the algorithm of,
That's right.
Is this relationship going to work? And you start asking more questions. You're like, oh, well, what about why? And like this, I would argue, man, it's really hard to have a long-term relationship with somebody who hates all the movies that you love and vice versa. That's tough.
There's no woman in the world I could be with who didn't love Out of Sight, Michael Clayton, and 3 Days of the Condor. I couldn't be with her. That's all there is to it. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
We're white guys of a certain age.
We are definitely white guys of a certain age. But I'll also add that it makes me sad when I love something and my wife doesn't. It's rare.
Oh, absolutely. It's rare for me too, and you're absolutely right. But I'm an optimistic person, and my method there is to force her to watch it over and over until she acknowledges that it's amazing. That's my method.
Is there a movie that makes you cry without fail?
Well, I'm not a big crier in movies. I can tell you that that I cannot withstand a movie that honestly attempts to engage me with the interior experience of an animal. For instance, there are 2 examples of this that involve donkeys. The Skolimowski film, EO, which I lasted 3 minutes, and the Bresson film about a donkey that I won't mangle by trying to pronounce it, Al-Hassard Balthazar, can't even, conceptually, will never even start watching that film. Too upsetting, just too upsetting. I'm a cat owner. I'm a cat owner. I can't, if you're going to ask me to take on what it must be like to be an animal in this world with humans, I can't do it. So that's one answer. The other answer is Hiroshima Mon Amour. And a film that came out a couple of years ago called Happy as Lazaro by Alice Rohrwacher. really caught me off guard. Like in my living room during the daytime, I was like tears like a televangelist. Like I just really caught me off guard, as did Hiroshima Mon Amour when I saw it for the first time. I think that's what I'm susceptible to, is something that sets itself up as one thing and delivers something devastating, in the last section that I didn't see coming. Like I'm not going to go to something that is designed, I understand, to try and make me cry.
That won't work. It will work on me, but I'm easy. I like to, my daughter's like, you're crying again, aren't you?
Oh, wow. Okay. It's good for you.
All right. There's a vast warehouse of props and you're a thief. You break in, you can steal one thing before the cops come. What do you take? Props from every movie ever.
I don't have to do it because my friend, Nikki Cat, who's an actor who's been in a couple of
been
things
in many
I've
of your
done,
movies. Yeah.
Yeah, sent me unbidden and out of the blue an amazing, perfect replica of the Maltese Falcon. Like, this thing is lethal. It's fucking heavy. Like, it's the real, like, I don't know how this was made, but it's the I think it's the actual Maltese Falcon. So I don't have to rob anything. Nikki did it for me.
All right. So two more. That's great. Your dad's favorite movie.
My dad loved musicals. So his two favorite musicals were Stormy Weather and The 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T, which he would rent. This is how obsessed he was with that film. He would rent a 16 millimeter print of The 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T every Christmas and a projector, and we would watch this in our living room every Christmas. And as it turns out, it's an amazing film. It really indicates that I inherited from my father not only his love of movies, but a very singular taste. Like, this is not on most people's lists of their favorite musicals. Like, it's just not. It ought to be, but it's just not, because it's really weird.
That lovely rumbling sound you hear is one of my favorite prisoners. He was a bass drummer in an orchestra I once conducted, had a very bad habit. You know that part in Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, where the drummer is supposed to go a boom, 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 boom. Well, this stupid loud always went a boom, 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 a boom. One extra boom, you know. He'll be here forever.
You mean he has to keep beating that drum forever?
Oh, that isn't the man I'm punishing. My man is inside the drum.
I was going to say, it's very weird, and your dad just was already interesting. He just became that much more interesting.
No, the projector, the print, every Christmas, making us, and we knew by, the third year, we knew all the lyrics to the song. Like, we looked forward to this.
And give me your mom's favorite, and tell me your mom's name too.
My mom's name was Marianne Bernard. That was her maiden name. Everybody knew her as Midge. And so I just assumed I was more like my father than I was my mother. But it took me a while to recognize that her nonlinear personality and her inability to engage in what I would call 90-degree angle thinking was something that when I was growing up seemed weird. But as I got older, I recognized was absolutely a part of my personality. If I was only my father, there are many things that I've made that I never would have made, that I view express my mother's more abstract, purely abstract, non-90-degree curvy thinking. But it took a while because I just had a closer relationship with my dad.
Was there a movie in there, real quick? A movie that she loved?
No, she did. That's the point. She was not a movie person. She didn't think about them. She didn't talk about them. She was a kind of passive, present in these conversations. The whole family was obsessed with movies except for her.
But if the quirky bent of you, and I mean quirky in the best possible way, the offbeat, the thing that you said that enough off from the norm to make a movie like Out of Sight memorable, that's your mom.
It is. And I can tell you that before she died, she was able at least to know and to see that I was recognized as an editor with her name. Like I Behind the Candelabra won an Emmy for best editing, and the award goes to Marianne Bernard, because I'd been taking that as a pseudonym for years. She was aware of my shout out. It's great when you can shout out to your mom.
It is. At the Emmys.
She was at a certain point when I started taking that pseudonym, many years before she died. She knew that was what I was saying, was the ability to think outside the box is key. You don't have to do what's been done before. You just don't.
Steven Soderbergh, thank you for sharing that last bit with me and with us, and apologize to whatever you're late for, and to whomever we kept you late from getting to. You were a mensch for.
Well, you know what? I'm going to drop your name, and the person that I'm meeting actually will go, "Oh, okay." So,
all right, I like that. I'm definitely going to drop yours. I've already been dropping.
We're all winning today.
Yeah, Steven, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
I don't know about you, but I felt like there was a lot to take away from that conversation with Steven Soderbergh. In no particular order: 1, I would like a Maltese Falcon. 2, I'm glad my wife and I like so many of the same movies and shows. 3, I spent most of my free time in high school playing Stratomatic baseball. I certainly was not watching 800 movies. Just remarkable. What has this interview inspired me to watch? I'm going to delve into the extra features on Criterion's edition of King of the Hill so I can watch The Underneath. I have a feeling I'm going to like Soderbergh's movie more than Soderbergh does. And because it was so formative for him, I'll rewatch Jaws. On Soderbergh's advice, I've already read the Jaws log by Carl Gottlieb, which is really a must for any movie fan who wants to understand how a picture gets made. That's our show. Thanks for listening. You can find many of the movies we talked about on the streaming service Max. We made a list for you. It's in our show notes. James Kim produces and edits Talking Pictures. Dory Stegman books the show. Glenn Matullo mixes each episode. Thanks to Phil Richards, Jaco Friedman, Julie Baton, Katie Daniels, and Emma Morris. Angela Carone is our executive producer. Special thanks to Michael Gluckstad and Allison Cohen from the Max podcast team. And as always, to Charlie Tavish from TCM. See you next time.